Welcome to Season 3, Episode 1 of Merendiando! We are back.
We are. I'm Camila Diaz-Varela.
And I'm Mónica Garrido.
And we're so happy to be back for another season. Let's dive right into it.
So to start the season, we have an amazing artist, Ophira Caleb. She is a multi-award-winning disabled writer, performer, and producer based in Toronto.
Yeah, and you might remember her from last season when we featured her show Literally Titanium at the Next Stage Festival that was happening in January. From that show came a really incredible initiative called Crip the Script. Crip the Script is an initiative that's meant to challenge, reframe, and reclaim language, systems, stories, and stages to center Crip or disability identities and experiences. We're going to talk a lot more about that in the episode.
Thank you for being back with us. Sit back, relax, and have a listen. Today, we're here with one of our favorite people in the world because we had her last season, but we said we need more.
We definitely need more.
We always need more of Ophira.
The conversation that we had last season with you was so interesting, and we feel like we were talking afterwards. We feel like we just started to scratch the surface of some of the really interesting topics that came up. So thank you again for meeting us and being on the show again.
Thank you so much for having me and for coming to my apartment with food. You're the absolute best.
Yes, we went Tex-Mex today, so we have some burritos from Citeca.
Shout out to all our Chicana friends, Chicano friends. You're great.
We have barbacoa burritos, chicken burritos, and a veggie burrito.
Wow.
Yes.
Cool. So let's dive into our first topic here. There's an initiative called Crip the Script that you are very involved in. Can you describe kind of how that initiative came to be?
Yes. It kind of evolved through the process of developing Literally Titanium, the show, and now has kind of moved beyond it. As we were developing the show throughout, like from very early stages of production, as a team, we were kind of thinking about how we were going to structure the process and sort of what it meant. I kept saying things like that I wanted to create disability theater as opposed to accessible theater, not creating something that exists in a specific normative framework, but finding a new way to create theater that really centers disability. And we kind of developed the phrase Crip the Script, both because it's fun to say, and also the idea of cripping or kind of centering that disability culture and experience in every part of the process, from how we scheduled rehearsals to how we actually developed the script, and also to the audience experience and the actual content of the show itself.
So can you just say a little bit more about the difference between accessible theater and disability theater? Like, I'm understanding that with disability theater, you're centering disabled artists and narratives, but also the audience too, like all of it? Yeah, just curious.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I'm still kind of developing in my own brain a little bit. Yeah. But I find that often that there's a little bit of a difference in between a show that's been developed in sort of a more typical or normative way, and it's a show that exists, and then you kind of look at the show afterwards once it already exists and think like, well, how can we make this accessible? How can we include more people, more audience, which is a wonderful thing. It's a beautiful thing. But it kind of makes a lot of the quote unquote like accessible features feel tacked on or like afterthoughts. And it makes it feel like they're not central to the art itself. They're adaptations of an existing piece of theater or of art. Whereas what we were really trying to do with the idea of disability theater and cripping the script was to not have any of these things be adaptations or add-ons, but have them be central to the production itself. So in how we wrote the script, our lighting, for example, like as we developed the show, we knew that we wouldn't have any sudden lighting cues or any snaps to black, that we were creating an aesthetic to be a bit more inclusive on a sensory front, and in the way that we like integrated into the script. I personally, as a disabled performer, had rest breaks and time to get water. So none of it was like, oh, we had a show and then we altered it. But the whole process of building the show was within that framework.
And you did this on the literally Titanium. Can you talk about how the audience reacted to this?
Yeah. It was super interesting, the audience reactions. After every show, we had a talk back, which initially I was a bit nervous about because I was like, oh, I'm going to pour my heart out on stage for an hour and then talk about it. But it actually, the talkbacks ended up being really beautiful, really great experiences where we kind of collectively debriefed on how we all were feeling before going out into the cold winter. And the reaction from a lot of people was really, really beautiful and encouraging. There's a moment in the show where I tilt back in my chair and just take like a 3-minute rest. It's not an intermission. We really consciously made sure that it wasn't an intermission because we wanted to sort of all have a moment of collective rest, essentially, and signaling that it's okay to take care of what our bodies need in that moment. And every night, the audience reacted differently to that moment. Some nights I'd say like, I'm going to take a breather, like you do you. And immediately everyone was like, okay, great. Like out come the phones, we're chatting, we're going to the washroom, which was lovely. And then some other nights I'd say it and people would kind of laugh a little bit uncomfortably and I could sense them kind of shuffling and being like, is this for real? Like, is this actually happening? What's going on? But every single show, there was always a moment where you almost felt like this collective exhale come over everyone, that they were like, oh, wait a minute, this is happening. And like, just sort of this collective release of tension. And so most of the talkbacks, we got some really beautiful, positive feedback about that moment and about kind of the reflection that happened in it, which was very encouraging.
That's cool. I remember when I saw it, it also took me definitely a minute to just understand what was happening, because it's not often that you get a rest in a show at all, that the performer is resting in front of you in a way that I have never seen before. Like, you really, to describe for people, you raised your chair up and then leaned back. So it was like you were higher than we regularly were seeing you in the show. And it was just like so beautiful, actually, to watch you just take your moment. So I was like, this isn't performing. It's not performing. They're just resting. So then I get to rest too.
Something that I remember also from your show when I saw it is you were talking about
EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
And you're explaining how when you start getting diagnosed or not diagnosed, and you were talking about something so hard, but it was so funny. I was like, like it was this weird way of like, I know it's okay to laugh. Everything felt welcome. Your whole show felt welcome and soft and nice, and it was okay to have all these feelings. So I don't know, thank you for creating this type of theater. I also was, when I went to see it with somebody who was not having a good day mentally, and I think it was amazing that we went to see your show that day, because that person was actually like, I'm okay. I felt safe at any moment. At the moment I arrived and I started having a panic attack, but if she was like, if I was breathing too loudly, it didn't matter because they told me it was okay. And if I wanted to step out, it didn't matter because it was okay. And when you took a break, this person took a break with you. And that was like amazing, because we have worked in theater for years, and the structure is so, you can't move, you can't breathe, you can't go to the washroom. The washroom is against
Or it's
theater.
like a confrontation when you want to do something different. Like, it's a confrontation when you want to walk out. Like, you create a scene, but you created a space where it was like welcome and beautiful to do that. It reveals so many more nuances about people because they get to just be and like actually ask for what they want and experiment. So I think Crip the Script is a really cool way to approach theater, and I'm really excited for you.
Talking about like implementing this, because do you think is I don't know how to formulate, but it's like, is it possible, or a lot of companies or theater productions are like, it's about the money?
Yeah, it's a really tricky thing. It's funny. I really appreciate what you both said about it being sort of like a gentle space, or like a welcoming space, because that was our ultimate goal, was to just, you know, we're just doing theater, you know, like we may as well be comfortable and try to make the space a bit more safe for more people, a bit more welcoming for more people. And it's funny though, because the action of doing that in itself is confrontational a little bit. For example, like working in a festival format, things have to be kind of structured and rigid. That's how it's always been done. That's how these things sort of function. And so for me, like, something I realized coming into the festival, as with most shows in that structure, you have like 10 minutes to like fully set up and get everything ready and then get backstage. And then the audience has to like load in really fast, and then like you're doing the show, then the show ends and everyone has to get out because the next show's coming in. And so things like that, sometimes we just needed an extra couple of minutes for certain audience members to breathe, or for me as a performer to just be able to sort of take a moment before launching into the show. And that's not necessarily a financial thing. It is a little bit, but it's also a thing that I think if it's thought of early in the process, you can kind of adjust and be like, oh, maybe we need a little bit more time for audience load in, and maybe we space shows out just a touch more in order to accommodate that. There is for sure also financial elements, but I think those two, it's a little bit of a matter of just like thinking it through in advance. A lot of the work that we did was in terms of audience experience, was very much sort of troubleshooting in advance. Sort of my benefit of having been someone who goes to theater and is disabled is that I was able to be like, oh, some things that I and my friends like experience quite a bit are, you know, issues of like accessing the accessible washroom or knowing where it is, knowing where we can wait before a show. And so that were things that it just takes planning and thinking through, and a willingness for everyone involved to get on board. I mean, we had a wheelchair cleaning station set up, mostly because every time I go to a show in the winter and my wheels are all snowy, I get very self-conscious being in a theater space. Yeah. But that's not hard. That's just a brush. That's just a person with a brush there.
But it's totally thinking about someone's experience that no one else is doing. So that's really cool. Yeah, it kind of sounds like the work of thinking ahead and you pushing for that in your show is you doing a lot of confrontation so that the audience doesn't have to. Yeah, and that's a lot of labor.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that is the other side of it. It was all of this work, and I truly think that the more of this kind of work that happens, the easier it will get, and the less labor that will have to happen. Like for this show, we made a visual story of the audience experience from booking a ticket to coming through the venue, with pictures and descriptions of just exactly what to expect and where, and also a list of any like any startling elements, a note about the content, just to really give people that outline. But now that exists, anytime that a show happens at that same theater, they can use our template, or we can reuse our own template, and all of this work becomes easier, sort of the more that we knowledge share and create. I keep using the word framework, but I think that's really what it is. It's a different way of approaching theater.
So it's like Crip to script can be taken from theater to theater.
Yeah, we've been calling it sort of our framework that we're developing, and connected to it establishing some workshops, and also I'm personally using it as sort of this grounding way of doing things that everything that I'm kind of doing going forward, I keep going back to the idea of like, how is this cripping the script? How is the process and the art and the experience of engaging with it all done within this kind of framework?
Very cool. And you're looking to do some workshops.
So we want to develop sort of a case study workshop of what our process was developing Literally Titanium, because we definitely learned quite a lot. There was a lot of trial and error and playing around. And so we want to basically just share what we learned through it. So that's one. And we're also working on a workshop to do with relaxed performance, almost like a master class where people can bring in, and our first one will be focused on comedy, bringing in comedic sketches, and we'll go through and figure out different ways to relax the sensory elements of them while still maintaining the joke or the point of view or whatever's being communicated with that sketch. There's a standard that's been established for relaxed performance. It has to do with not having any sudden or startling sound or light cues. So those standards are kind of universal across the board, but I think how they affect each medium is a little bit different. For sketch comedy, as someone who came up in sketch comedy, I know that there's a lot of use of sudden sensory elements as punctuating jokes. You know that a sketch is over when the lights go down, and so that's when you're like triggered to clap. And usually that happens really suddenly because it kind of punctuates whatever that last joke was of the sketch and triggers you to laugh and have that reaction. And so I think there's a lot of hesitation in sketch to relax it because it's seen as maybe a lesser form of comedy, or of like, you would ideally structure something in this way, but if you have to, then you'll take away certain elements, and it's like not quite as good, but yay inclusion or something like that. Whereas I think if we create the space to actually really look at the comedy and the jokes and see where it's coming from, we can structure things in a way that is more inclusive and on a sensory level, and also still be funny and still be maybe even better than it might have been, because it's forced you to really reckon with how you're communicating different things. And I don't think that's unique to comedy. I think there is a stigma in theater in general. I was asked a lot with Literally Titanium whether we were sold out for our regular performances because people only saw relaxed. And I'd be like, oh, no. The whole run's relaxed. That's just what this show is. I think it comes back to the idea of Crip the script and having it in the process from the beginning, is that it doesn't have to be a lesser version of art or a version of a show that different things have been taken away from. It can be the art. Like, it can be it in itself and be wonderful.
Yeah.
But I also got a really interesting question, two kind of related questions. One was about how one can crip opera, which is really interesting. And another one was about what does virtuosity mean within a Crip context?
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
What does that mean? I don't understand.
So, it's tricky because I feel unclear about the definition of virtuosity in some ways, but I think it's usually used as a way to describe the height of a craft. So when you being a virtuoso, being a master at the craft. And I think both of those things kind of reference, both of the questions also about how to Crip opera, reference a very specific framework that existed in, the 1800s, essentially this idea that that's what art was. In opera, especially like operas that were written by Mozart, Mozart's even told you when to breathe, essentially. Like everything about the opera is planned and scripted, and the idea of being an opera singer was, and still is to a certain extent, just like very much mastering those sort of prescribed elements. Which, it's a good question, because where does Crip fit into that? Where does difference and like how do you open that up? But to me, I see no reason that we have to prescribe to that model. And I think the idea of virtuosity, or of like being extremely skilled at something, can apply to more than what we think it does. Like I think like the main thing that I'm practicing is how to do things differently, and I hope to like continue to improve and like develop my skills on how to do that. And maybe that's its own form of virtuosity.
Yeah, like as you try to shift your own definitions of success, like what is a successful moment to you right now?
Oh, such a good question. I mean, to me, the biggest quote-unquote success of doing literally Titanium was the connections that were made. We had space for people to sort of write thoughts after the show as well. And we got just some really beautiful feedback of people just saying that both the show and also the space that the show afforded really resonated with them and meant a lot to them. And to me, those moments of connection, I think, are the biggest. I mean, what else is there really in terms of when you're trying to communicate something? I think the biggest success that can come out of that is someone saying like, I hear you. I mean, that's basically what art is, I think.
That's a very different definition, because it's way less like self-centered. It's way more like community-centered, because if you're like a virtuoso singer, it's like, oh yes, I'm amazing. But you're saying like, look at this amazing group that I know now. Like, look at these amazing connections. And that's definitely a radical shift in perspective. Yeah.
Where can we find more? Like, if people want to go and do the workshops, where can they find you?
So we have a newly created Crip the Script Facebook page. Please follow it. That would be great, because it's brand new. And also me personally on Instagram. We're also developing a mailing list, so we'll be sending out emails, and we'll have a way to connect to that through social media as well.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and for sharing your reflections on your show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Radio Aluna Teatro is produced by Aluna Theater with the support from the Metcalf Foundation, the Laidlaw Foundation, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Toronto Arts Council.
Aluna Theater is Beatriz Pizano and Trevor Schwellnus, with Sue Balint and Nahmens. Radio Aluna Theater is produced by Camila Diaz-Varela and Mónica Garrido.
For more about Aluna Theater, visit us at alunatheater.ca, follow at Aluna Theater on Twitter or Instagram, or like us on Facebook.
Follow and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever else you get your podcasts. This podcast is recorded in Toronto, or Dagarondo, the territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the Wendat Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and nations recorded and unrecorded.
We are deeply thankful to these nations for stewarding the land so that we might live in peace and respect for each other. As it is outlined in the Dish with One Spoon, One Cup, that all people who live here, settlers, indigenous folks, and others, must adhere to. One way to support indigenous stewardship and reclamation of their lives, cultures, and land is to support indigenous liberation movements in whatever capacity you can.
Right now, there is urgency around the situation with the Wet'suwet'en Nation in so-called BC. Please support their work to remove the RCMP from their lands. You can make a financial contribution to their camp and legal defense funds. Links are in the show notes. Miigwech and Nyawangoa.